podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam. This is All Across America. David, welcome to All Across America.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm happy to be here.
You are the Texanist, one of the longest-running columns in Texas Monthly, the national magazine of Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became anointed the Texanist?
Well, I'm a native Texan. I grew up in Temple, just an hour north of Austin. Went to school at UT and was kind of directionless after I got out of college a little bit, but always enjoyed writing and enjoyed magazines, and grew up with Texas Monthly on my parents' coffee table. They were subscribers, so I literally grew up with the magazine being around, so I always had an interest. And then shortly after college, I'm giving you the long version here, I hope that's all right. Shortly after college, did a internship. It was, it was like an adult internship. But one of my favorite writers for Texas Monthly was Joe Nick Petoskey, and anyone who's read the magazine for a time will know that name. Anyway, I did an internship, and I was kind of attached to Joe Nick, and so I did that for a year or so, and kind of got my foot in the door a little bit. And a few years later, was hired as a fact checker, and we have an, if I may say so, an esteemed fact department, and I was happy to join that. But also, at the time we had a pretty small staff, and a lot of people did double duty. So, while I was a fact checker, we started the column, which, to really answer your question, is the Texanist replaced a column that wasn't on the back page at the time, but my colleague Annie Dingus, who was a longtime writer at the magazine, had a column called Encyclopedia Texanica, which dealt in matters Texana. She also did some games. It was a fun, humorous column. And so she retired, and they retired that, and we're looking to replace it. And I had written a few things for, small things for the magazine, but I guess Evan Smith was our editor at the time, and somehow thought I would be maybe a good fit for a Texana humor-ish column. And that's kind of how it began.
And they're all letters that you respond to.
Yes, the idea from the outset was, even before we had the name The Texanist, that we had a senior editor at the time, Jake Silverstein, who was kind of instrumental in launching the column. He's at the New York Times Magazine now, of all places. But we had decided that it would be, fun to do like an old style advice column, where I would take letters and offer advice and my opinion on matters Texan, and that it would be humorous. And then when we came up with the idea of the Texanist, it would be kind of like a character, and I write in third person, which I've done almost the whole time, which really gives it a strange and fun air.
And I mean, some of these submissions are some slightly off the wall, some so Texan to almost be hard to believe they're real. I mean, there was a woman whose boyfriend was complaining that she had tie-dyed a T-shirt in his chili pot.
Right. I remember that one. Yeah, it turns out the strange ones are like they turn out, the ones right when I read it, I'm like, that's too crazy. That will never work as a column, But they seem to turn out to be some of the best ones. I think the most recent one we published was, and so specific. Like, it was kind of this guy had written, and he'd grown up in a oil field camp out in West Texas with a fellow named Hoot Gibson, and he was, after he'd seen that Hoot, who he grew up with, passed away, and then in looking at that obituary online, he had found other people named Hoot Gibson, and he was wondering if Hoot was in any way a Texas nickname. So that was a very strange question, but it was a fun.
And one of the questions you've been asked, and you've covered a couple of times, is what qualifies as being Texan? You mentioned some of the most famous Texans ever, Sam Houston, Stephen Austin, G.W. Bush, were not born in Texas.
That's right. Yeah, that's one I've probably answered that, variations of that one probably as much, I repeat a little bit and like I said, a variation of the same theme in a question. And that's one that's come up like either in that form or, when can I call myself a Texan? Like I wasn't born here, but my parents moved here when I was one and I grew up. Can I call myself a Texan? Or I was born in Texas, but moved away when I was one and have lived in New York City ever since, but can I identify as a Texan? And I think the way I've almost always come down is, really on a case by case basis. But as you point out, some of our most famous Texans, or were not born in Texas, but you can be a Texan and not be a naturally born Texan.
Gotcha. Let me pose a situation for you. Okay.
Okay.
Tech bro, post pandemic, moves to Austin, buys a pair of cowboy boots at Allen's at South Congress. Can he call himself a Texan?
I think that person, maybe we're thinking of the same person. I don't know. Does he own a car company and a rocket company? I don't know.
No, no.
I think that person, I think, could call until we know a little more, he could call himself a resident of Texas, I think.
A resident, okay, all right.
Oh,
So it's not quite a Texan, it's a half step until becoming a full-bred, full
very right,
Texan, we'll
yeah,
say.
something like that.
And I wasn't referring to any specific person, just
Oh,
the general character of,
I thought you were talking about our new Austinite friend.
I mean, although Austin has had an explosion in, population in the last few years, and you're based in Austin, how has the city changed in the last 10, 20 years?
Well, I came to school, like I said, I grew up in Temple, which is only an hour north of here. But I moved to Austin in 1984, and I've been here pretty much ever since. So I've seen a lot of change over those 40 some odd years.
Wow.
But and it's slow and gradual. You don't notice it as it's happening, really. But when you're coming into town from somewhere and you see the skyline, just the skyline alone is insane. The way it's changed. It's unbelievable. Early in my college career, I was a runner at a law firm, and I used to, doing the errands downtown. I knew every building over 6 stories probably, just by heart, and I knew what law firms were in which buildings, and now I find myself I work downtown, but I'll turn a corner and see a building that I, did have never seen before, and the population has grown a lot, and it's good and bad. I don't hate all the change, but it is different. But also I'm 40 years older than I was when I got here, so that makes a difference too.
Now,
There's
is it true
pluses and
that
minuses.
is it true that no building is allowed to be taller than the state capitol?
That's not true. There's plenty of buildings that are taller than the Capitol, but I believe what there are it's I assume it might be state regulated, but or a combination of city and state. But I think there are now corridors that you can't block the view of the Capitol, so you
I
couldn't
see,
build
okay.
a tall building in certain corridors.
Gotcha,
And I
gotcha.
don't know exactly what those are. I know, like, when you're driving on I-35 through Austin, you have a pretty good view of the Capitol most of the time, and I suspect that they like that.
Gotcha, and, yeah, I've traveled quite a bit through Austin, and, I used to there's nice that there are some institutions that have, I mean, remain test of time, and Fonda San Miguel is one
Oh,
of my
yeah.
favorite restaurants, and they just put out a book celebrating, I don't know, was it 40 years, 50
It
years?
Yeah, I think it was 50 years. I
Wow.
think they were close, the Texas Monthly in a few years ago in 2023 celebrated its 50th anniversary, and I believe Fond de San Miguel was right on the heels of that. So I think it
Oh,
was
wow.
probably
Let's talk about mythical Texas versus, the real Texas, and, we're talking about Austin and how much it's changed, and, if you think of the European mindset and the European understanding of Texas is probably very different from, pardon the pun, but having boots on the ground.
right.
What is your take on that?
Cowboy boots on the ground. I haven't heard that one, but I'm going to steal it. I'll use that. That's something that the magazine has dealt with its whole 50 years, and it's something that in my column, that's like that's something I play with all the time, just walking that fine line because, it's hard to define what but I mean, everyone knows what the mythical Texan is, it's the cowboy boots and big hat and oil wells in the backyard and, 1,000 head of cattle, and it's not real. For it is real for some Texans, but not generally speaking. But playing with that, and the customs that and traditions that go with that, and even attitudes and political attitudes, all of it, that it's a stereotype and like anything else. But I have fun playing with that. Both kind of in the same breath, I can sometime dispel the myth of the mythic Texan and also promote the myth of the mythic Texan. It's and the Texan, the character of the Texanist, which is, the Texanist, but we ramp it up a little bit. So it's something fun to play with.
Yeah, it's part of your wizardry, I would say.
Exactly. And it's
Um,
fun. It's entertaining. And most people get it,
most people.
Yeah, most Texans actually get it. Some are offended sometimes.
So, you answered a question, is there such a thing as too many Texas-themed tattoos?
I remember that one. That was a good one. I love that the illustration that went with that one was a great illustration, I thought. But yeah, that was a great question. Strange question, but great question. I forget exactly where I came down on it, and I don't know what your podcasted rate is rated, but I remember that one went a little bit blue. If I don't know if you've read it recently, but you know, I'm not even going to go there. But it was a oddly placed Willie Nelson tattoo I referenced. I think.
I
Um,
see. Well, this
right.
podcast is as free as Texas, so feel free to speak your mind.
Uh, I think we were talking about Texas themed tattoos in the column, and I think it's been a while since I read that, but I do remember referencing, and I think I was Googling Texas tattoos or something and came across the image of a female who had a Willie Nelson tattoo, down in her nether regions with a oddly placed beard. It was kind of upsetting, but I don't. I think the answer was with that one. I forget how many that guy that wrote the letter had, but I think we had already crossed the Rubicon. And it's like,
Yeah,
why,
right, right.
why stop now? Let's keep
Right,
going.
yeah. Yeah. You got 25 at 26 is not gonna make a difference.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah.
I mean, so what's the fact? I mean, out of all the states, I would say, and I've traveled to 49 of them, there's no state that has more of a fascination, a more of attachment to its state shape than Texas, I'd say.
That's true, I would say. And, part of that is, and I've wondered sometimes it's because it's a very unique shape, as you know, especially among the Western rectangles.
Right.
And so it stands out, but it's also, the Texans are very prideful, prideful people. I wonder if it was a rectangle, if they would have the same sense of pride.
Right.
But you're absolutely right, and that kinda goes back, to the tattoos, but the shape of Texas, you can find all manner of tchotchke and everything in the shape of Texas. And it's familiar worldwide, I would say, that shape.
I haven't seen it, but there's a Texas-shaped pool. I guess I makes sense.
There are a number of them. Last summer, I had the fun experience of traveling around the state to some of the what I think I called the 5 best Texas-shaped pools around the state.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're all over the place, but yeah, fun.
What was your favorite of the Texas-shaped pools?
Well, I went highbrow and lowbrow. There's one that's one of those lazy river pools that is on the roof of the Marriott Marquis in downtown Houston. And it's really something to see because it's on the roof and it's enormous, and it's a lazy river in the shape of Texas on the roof of this fancy hotel in downtown Houston. And then on the other end of that, I traveled to Amarillo, and I don't know, you may or may not be familiar with the Big Texan Steak Ranch in Amarillo. That's the place that I-40 goes through Amarillo. Once was Route 66, but there's signs, for hundreds of miles on either side of Amarillo advertising the 72-ounce steak. And if you eat this 72-ounce steak and you finish it in an hour, it's free. But attached to the Big Texan Steak Ranch is the Big Texan Steak Ranch Motel. And at that motel, there is a very sad Texas-shaped swimming pool. But that was an experience.
So for folks listening in, that is 4 pounds of meat. Almost 2 kilograms for our folks overseas of
Correct. Yeah,
Texas steak. And
yeah.
I suppose, the dad in me would say, if you finish all 4 pounds of that Texas steak, the last thing you wanna do is go swimming afterwards.
Probably the case, yeah, and I think, along with the steak, you have to eat, like, a baked potato and a salad and a shrimp cocktail or something like that, so
Right, right. So in other words, these folks have eaten $99 worth of a $100 meal, and then they can't finish that last bite, and they're
and they pay $99 for it. 'Cause if you don't finish it, you have to pay for it.
Well, speaking of, we went from Houston to Amarillo. Maybe we could take a look at, or talk about some of the different regions of Texas. And you all had put out a map recently, everything from Southeast Texas to far West Texas and the North Texas. And one question that I had is, I knew somebody who described themselves as a Southern gentleman, and they were
Mhm.
from Beaumont. And
Yeah,
Beaumont is, just across the state line from St. Charles, Louisiana, but somebody from Fort Worth would probably not say that.
that's right, and Texas it's big, so and it's also, located sort of at the westernmost terminus of the southern United States and easternmost terminus of the western United States. And, it's the kind of kickoff of the southwestern region of the United States. But Texas itself, yeah, if you're in Beaumont, in southeast Texas, it that when you're in that area and you travel through there, those in even East Texas, even north of there in East Texas, it has a very southern feel. You got the moss covered oaks and it's swampy and it's very different than far West Texas or the up in the Panhandle. But yeah, it really feels like the South, over there as opposed to the western part of the state.
Is there a line, of separating what would be West Texas from the rest of the state? I think that tends to be the biggest demarcation is what is West Texas. I've heard Abilene is Fort Worth calls itself the gateway. What
Right.
what's it to you?
Well, it's hard to really nail down. Abilene, my mother is from Abilene, and Abilene is West Texas. If you ask anyone, but if you look at the map, you're like, well, that is kind of Central Texas, really. But in Fort Worth, what they used to say, the- derogatorily, that Dallas is where the East peters out, and Fort Worth is where the West begins. But it depends. We definitely have far west Texas, which is, the region they call the Trans-Pecos region, which is the west of the Pecos River. And that's definitely West Texas. But yeah, it's Central Texas and South Texas, Southeast Texas, the Rio Grande Valley. Then you get Panhandle, North Texas and Northeast Texas is sort of its own region. But yeah, the central part, kind of central West Texas is hard to really nail down.
What's your favorite region of the state outside of Austin?
Well, I do the Austin's in the hill country for those not familiar, which is a beautiful part of the state. We got, kind of rolling hills and it's green most of the time and lush. The geography is such that you have spring fed swimming pools. It's really a wonderful part of the state. It's hard. I'm not going to pick a favorite because they're so different, but West Texas also, you're in the Chihuahuan Desert for a good part of that. Very different but just stunningly beautiful, just stunningly beautiful. And that's stunningly beautiful for the whole country or even the world. It's beautiful out
Yeah,
in West
yeah,
Texas.
yeah. And I mean, sparsely populated. I remember reading about Loving County. I think in the lower 48 is the least populated county in the lower 48. Is that right?
That's probably right. Yeah. That's right up, just below New Mexico on that straight line going towards El Paso, west of the Panhandle, southwest of the Panhandle. But yeah, there's not much there. It's well, I think at one time the population of the county was like 78 or something like that. And it's not a small county,
Yeah, right. We're probably talking larger than Rhode Island.
Yeah, or probably close to it.
Well, let's get into some Texas sayings. One of my favorites of which, and I truly don't know what it means. It's in the Jerry Jeff Walker song, "Redneck Mother." Is that the one? Goat roper.
Goat roper, yeah, that's one. Had a bumper sticker that said "Goat ropers need love too." Something like that. Yeah, goat roper. Yeah, I grew up with that term. That was it's like shit kicker or something like that. But a goat roper is, that's not. I guess it would be a cowboy, but it's not a. You're not working with cows, so goat roper is a cowboy. Is a cowboy who who works with goats. Rather. I don't know where that. I don't know where that.
Is there less esteem for a cowboy that works with goats as opposed
I think
to
yes.
cows?
I think at one time that was a goat roper was used semi in a derogatory fashion. A cowboy
I
was a
see.
cowboy, but a goat roper was a goat roper. But you still didn't want to mess with a goat roper.
Here's another good one, which I love. I don't even. I kind of guess what it means. Don't squat on your spurs.
That should be obvious. You don't. A spur. A spur has they jangle, but they have these pointy rowels on them and hang off the heels of your boots. So you don't want to squat on those because your derriere is going to get gouged by some spurs. So
I I mean, does it mean though in everyday parlance that be careful what you say or what you do?
I generally be careful and kind of just be thoughtful about what you're doing and your surroundings and things like that. Don't squat on your spurs.
Gotcha. Oh, and this isn't really so much a Texas saying, but a Texas happening. And you had answered this question recently regarding the meat sweats and something called diet induced thermogenesis. I hadn't heard that one before.
Right. It got a little sciencey. That was a good one. That's a term you hear, down here, the meat sweats. But, we eat a lot of beef here when barbecue rules, and people, you hear people talk about the meat sweats, but it's usually in a funny way. But so the question I got was, are the meat sweats real? Is that a real phenomenon? Uh, I was able to talk to a gastroenterologist, and it turns out the meat sweats are real. The thermogenesis, the heating created by digesting food can induce perspiration, which is somewhat fascinating.
And so it has nothing to do with spicing. It's just more
No,
the
it's not spicing at all.
wow.
That might add to it, I would guess, but no, just the act of digestion creates heat, and energy transfer, and protein requires more energy than vegetables or other things, fatty things, and it varies from person to person what will induce an actual sweating event, but it's a real thing. The meat sweats.
Well, if you ever encounter that phenomenon in Texas or not, you're not imagining it.
That's right. Right. It also is
I
hot here sometimes, so
I wouldn't recommend it as a exercise routine, but
right, yeah. No, you don't wanna do that.
well, speaking of food, let's get into barbecue. We talked a little bit about chili. Do you prefer brisket or ribs?
Brisket or ribs? Yes. And sausage to complete what we call down here the Texas Trinity is brisket, ribs, and sausage. I mean, if I had to choose one, geez, I don't know. It depends. Sometimes you have a craving for pork rib, and sometimes you want that, beef brisket. It just depends. But the three of them go very well together.
Are there different regions of Texas barbecue?
Not well. Not really. In South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley, you do get barbacoa, which is it's not really a variation of barbecue. It's kind of its own thing. But it's an interesting question. Not really. Texas barbecue is Texas barbecue. I think lately
Yeah.
it's changing. We're getting a lot of influences from other cuisines around the world. So what used to be just plain barbecue is being spiced up with world cuisines.
Oh, yeah. I love Korean barbecue. Love
Oh,
it.
yeah. Mhm.
Now that you would get the sweats from regardless of the chewing the meat.
Of your meat content intake.
So what's the difference between a ranch and a farm?
Well, that's a good question. Generally speaking, I believe and I don't have a dictionary in front of me, but a ranch would involve the raising of livestock, cattle, whereas a farm, you would be raising an agricultural product like a wheat or sorghum or something like that. Now, I think there are differences. Like people refer to someone being a sheep farmer, so
Oh,
you're not. I don't know where that came from, but you're not a sheep rancher. You're a sheep farmer.
how about
But
goats? Would you be a goat rancher or a goat farmer?
not be a goat farmer, a goat race. Wasn't there a band called the Goat Farmers? Oh, Beet Farmers. Sorry.
It reminds me of a story, talking about ranches. I was at a bar in Fort Worth and got to talking to a guy who was in the ranch management program at TCU, Texas Christian University. And first of all, he was wearing the most American outfit ever, cowboy hat and flip flops, which I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
And he told me that he was from a ranch in New Mexico, just over the Texas state line. And, he knew I was from New York. So he didn't look askance at this question, but I committed what I realized later was a major faux pas. And I asked him how many herd of cattle he had.
Oh, right, yeah. How many head of cattle, how many acres? That's just something you don't typically do with someone you're not especially someone you're not familiar with. That's prying into their personal business a little too much, I think. But also, I think, Texans are while it's a one of those funny things where Texans are known to be boastful, but they're also known to be, private private people and kind of not boastful sometimes. And that's one of the things they often hold close to their chest.
Which is fair, and I realized later that in for the record, he had 500 herd of cattle 500 head of cattle, I should say, and I guess the understanding is that you can compute if you know how much, each cattle is worth times X amount, get a
Right.
sense of their their
Yeah,
operation, which is a little bit
right.
prying a little bit too much into their finances, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just something we typically don't do.
Well, you said there's a lot of land in Texas, but not a lot of public lands.
That's true. That is true. That's I forget where we rank, but I know we're up there. We might be number 1 because I think it's in the mid to upper 90s. I think it's like 96 or 97% of the state is privately owned. We have some like, again, there's a lot of land, but we don't have a lot of public lands. We have a pretty good state park system, and we have some big national parks, but yeah, it's a lot of it is just fenced off and private property.
Which is surprising for the West, because a lot of the Western states that have a lot of, BLM, Land Bureau of
Mhm.
Land Management, and I mean, percentages of some of these states are owned by the people.
That's true. Yeah, I guess it goes back, to our roots as, an independent nation when the Republic of Texas was in existence. Some of that carries over, and I think some of the when we were became part of the United States, I think, that land just wasn't gonna be transferred transferred to the Union. So, I think that has something to do with it.
One thing that is public is the beaches.
True. All the the beaches, there's a law here called the Open Beaches Act, and people who come from out of state are often shocked, when you go to the beach in Texas, and with some exception, you will encounter in depending on the time of year, you will encounter a lot of automobile traffic on the beach, which is unusual for the country as a whole, I think. But yeah, I grew up going down to North Padre Island, and, in the summertime, there's a lot of traffic on the beach. But that's part of that was because of public access to the beach. And also the history of, our beaches here are very flat. And the beach itself historically was used as a thoroughfare. So I think it dates back to that, but also just the public's ability to access the beach.
Which is great for a state that doesn't have a lot of public lands. That's
True.
nice that there is one spot where everyone can access it. I mean, I guess in some instances for better or worse, because I did read a letter from a reader who was quite surprised that, again, as you mentioned, all the, vehicle traffic while they're
Right.
laying out trying to get a suntan, and you've got a, coal rolling F-250 driving by.
Exactly, right, and it can be shocking, and in summertime on a popular beach, there's quite a bit of traffic. It's not
Right,
it's
right.
it's not a pleasant experience.
And no traffic lights, I presume, on the beaches.
No, no traffic lights, there are speed limits, and you have to be careful, but, you know and again, some of that, if there's portions of it, like the southern end of North Padre Island is the Padre Island National Seashore, which is a national park, and it's just the in Texas we're blessed with these beautiful barrier islands,
Right,
and Padre Island being the largest and probably best known, and the southern 75 miles of it is a 75-mile stretch of fairly pristine beach, which you can drive on because that's you would have no other way to access it, those far reaches.
right. I mean, it's the longest barrier island in the world, is that correct?
I believe Padre Island itself is that's or is, you know, I think it is the longest sand barrier island, and and that stretch that's the Padre Island National Seashore, I think is I believe largest undeveloped stretch of barrier island in the world.
And you said, I mean, it's remote. I mean, a reader had asked a question about connecting by bridge, the South Padre.
Yeah, that was a good one. 'Cause Padre Island was at one time, and semantics, it gets weird here because you have Padre Island, and nowadays you have North Padre Island, South Padre Island, which also happen to be communities on Padre Island. So it's a little bit confusing whether that's an island named North Padre Island and South Padre Island, or if it's one island with two communities, North Padre Island, South Padre Island. Anyway, back in the 50s, there was a channel cut through it about midway through the island. And yeah, that letter I got, I thought the guy had his tongue in his cheek when he asked the question, but he was saying, can't we reconnect these islands by way of a bridge? Which is really kind of preposterous if you know where that bridge would be, and it's at a very remote location that no one would use, and it'd be completely unnecessary.
A proverbial bridge to nowhere.
Exactly.
Well, maybe not a bridge, but a tunnel.
A tunnel? Yeah, maybe a pontoon bridge, I don't know.
So let's turn to cowboy boots, and you've answered a couple questions on cowboy boots, and two of them I'd want to hear your opinion on. One was cuffed trousers and cowboy boots.
Trousers, that's right. I remember getting that one. That's that's a thing. I'm not a style consultant, but I do put myself as an expert on kind of Texas wear. And I would imagine as things go, these trends come and go over the years. I think with a suit, you will see, a cuff trouser with a cowboy boot. And, if you're in some of the high rises in downtown Houston, some of the law firms and energy companies, it's not uncommon. I think the key there is the length of the trouser itself. But anyway, those trends come and go. But no, not forbidden.
And what do you mean by the length of the trouser?
Well, and again, it could be a personal style, but a lot of times people like to have, men that wear that like to have a nice break in the trouser. So you wouldn't want like what we would call a high water, you know, especially with a cuff. But like I said, those trends kind of come and go, and you're free to be you. So
How about tucking your jeans into cowboy boots? That was another question.
right, that one I think also it kind of depends. Like not forbidden, I would say, and especially if you're doing it in a utilitarian manner. If you're a cowboy and it's muddy out, you will tuck your jeans in your boots, or for
100%.
various other reasons. But as purely stylistic thing, if you're a new boot wearer or something and you're going out to a dance hall and you tuck your jeans in your boots, you're gonna get some looks.
Although it does seem to break down along gender lines, and not necessarily with jeans, but women will often have the boots, wearing maybe tights or sort of yoga pants along those
Right.
lines. Whereas for men, it's almost always pants, trousers over the boots. Have you found that to
Sure.
be the case?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, unless you have a reason to tuck your pant leg into your boot, then typically you're gonna see that boot inside
I mean,
the
and
pant leg.
it makes sense. I do a lot of work outdoors, and whenever I remember, I always put my jeans over my boots because otherwise you're getting rocks in your socks. I mean, that's the whole
Right.
point. It's,
Exactly. True. Yeah, the only kind of argument that you would not that you would put it into use, but, some of these boots have beautiful shafts that are, it has nice stitching or something, and you're hiding a beautiful part of this boot. But I guess that's for you to enjoy.
you know, I think we've got a solution here. And you were talking about high waters.
Oh, there
You
we
could
go.
wear high water trousers with the
Right?
beautifully stitched
There you go.
calves on the boots. Then you got the
Yeah.
best of both
Or
worlds.
One tucked, one not tucked. Um,
Or you could just cross your legs a lot, and that's when you often see the shaft that is,
That's true,
exposed.
true, true.
Well, speaking of cowboy boots, let's talk about dance halls. I learned that Texas at one point had or still does the most dance halls of any state in the country.
That wouldn't surprise me, that two-stepping is quite a pastime here, and, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And, back in a lot of our dance halls, it's a way for a community to gather. I mean, especially back in the old days, and especially in parts of the state where you had a large, German population or Mexican population that would, gather in these dance halls. I grew up going to, up in Temple. Saturday night, we were at the dance hall. Various dance halls around the town, and it seems to be. I don't know if about the rest of the country, but at least in Austin, and I know some of our cities, two stepping is kind of having a big moment right now. There's lots of two stepping. All these little dance halls will have, dance lessons for new people to come and learn to dance early before a show starts, or before the band starts. They'll do a dance lessons.
And believe it or not, it's a thing up north too. There's a place in Danbury, Connecticut that I go to quite frequently, and it's got
Really?
the two-step, and yeah, it is a thing, which is great, and it's amazing to see college kids all about it.
Oh yeah, it's good to hear. It's nice to see the young folks. A lot of the younger people in my office, many from out of state, are really taking it up and get out there once a week and then hit it up.
Texas taboos, one of which you mentioned pulling a blue bonnet. Can you talk a little bit about that and any other, taboos that come to mind?
Yeah, that I forget that appeared in a column somewhere. That one, I forget what that was from, but we have around our office at Texas Monthly, we have these quote walls, and we'll have some notable quotes from stories of the past, and I think that appears in one of them that's up on the wall. The bluebonnet, as you may or may not know, is our state flower, and that we take a lot of pride in the bluebonnet, and the highway department, the Texas Department of Transportation, I forget, it's something like, 800,000 pounds of bluebonnet seed every year is laid out along our highways and byways. And come April, especially if conditions are right, the bloom is beautiful, these beautiful bluebonnets. And a tradition is the bluebonnet portrait. You take your family out and you find a spot and sit in the bluebonnets and have a nice family portrait made. But the it is a you're not gonna go to jail for it, but, uh, picking the bluebonnets is frowned upon
Fair
in
enough.
certain circles.
Although it doesn't sound like with hundreds of thousands of pounds of seeds and hundreds of thousands of bluebonnets that the state will be lacking in bluebonnets if 1 or 2 is
But,
picked.
yeah, and the newly forest bluebonnets too. Yeah, we have plenty of bluebonnets.
How about vegetarianism?
You that's one of those, traits of the mythic Texan, or not the the carnivorous mythic Texan who would never dabble in vegetarianism. But you see that more and more, and, no, you're not gonna get in trouble for being a vegetarian. Again, certain
Well
parts of the state, you might get a funny look if you have then and you're ordering a portobello steak.
well, I think a lot of folks don't realize that Whole Foods is from Austin, Texas.
That's absolutely right. I remember going down North Lamar Boulevard to the original location.
Yes, indeed. And, speaking of Austin, "Don't mess with Texas." It's been a statewide slogan. A lot of people don't realize what the origin of that slogan was. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as far as I know, it was an ad campaign for the Department of Transportation by an advertising company here in town, GSD&M that came up with the "Don't Mess with Texas" campaign, and we had the you still see it, and it's still it has to be it's probably I'm not an advertiser, but one of the most successful ad campaigns ever. You still have, the red, white, and blue barrels that have "Don't Mess with Texas," and I think they're still making these commercials where you'll have a celebrity star in it, the list of celebrities that have been in those is long. But yeah, "Don't Mess with Texas."
Starting with Stevie Ray Vaughan in, I think, 1986.
Wow, that's pretty good, but yeah, that would add up. But yeah, George Strait, Matthew McConaughey, I mean, there's Earl Campbell's a famous one, lots of
Well,
them.
speaking of Texas roads, one thing that Texas is famous for, and I haven't seen in quite this extreme, is the stack interchanges. Particularly in Dallas, the High Line is something to behold or to be fearful of if you're driving along.
Right. Yeah, someone posed that question a few years ago, and, I've traveled out of state by car, but I never really paid attention, I guess. But yeah, mainly in the cities, in the populated areas, we'll have these enormous, overpasses, the stack interchange where, the spaghetti bowl or the mix master or whatever you wanna call them, but they are exceptionally tall here. And if I remember, part of the reason is we have something that other we're somewhat unique here is our system of feeder roads or access roads that run alongside, the major thoroughfares. And just the way the physics of interchanges work, you and then the regulation of how high, you have to be above a roadway, that it ends up being quite tall. You know, but I think there's one in Houston, or there's even a term in highway engineering, it's called the Texas stack, I think. I think it has its own name, the
Yeah,
Texas
they are
stack. I think it
something
might
to
be
behold.
a 6 level, interchange or something like.
Well, speaking of Texas terms, the word Texas itself is a Scrabble word. What's that all about?
That's true. That was another column I did, I think back in when Words with Friends was a phenom on the smartphones. I still play it myself. I don't know if you do. But yeah, someone discovered that Texas was an acceptable word when typically you wouldn't have a proper noun. But there is lowercase Texas, which, if I recall, is the definition is it was something like the captain's quarters or officer's quarters in a steamship or paddle boat. I think steamship is called the Texas, but that would be a lowercase Texas, and that is acceptable Scrabble word.
All right. Well, you heard it
Whereas
here first, and it's got an X in it, so that's a good amount of points right there.
right, exactly. Yeah, I think in that too, I also pointed out, I believe Colorado is an acceptable word, lowercase, but that's like a a style or shade of cigar, and I think I
Ah.
pointed out that, there was another one. Oh, well, both New and Jersey were what acceptable, just not
I
together.
was gonna say New Jersey. I mean, well, what is
Not
Jersey?
together. And there was a couple others, I think, but I don't recall.
Well, one thing that is very true of Texas, and I'll say it by way of a story, is that everything is really bigger in Texas. And I'm big music fan, record collector, and I remember going into Forever Young Records for the first time in Grand Prairie. And
Mhm.
I walked in, and this place is like the internet come to life. I mean, it is the size of maybe a football field, and it's just filled with records. I've been to a lot of record stores. Again, I've been to 49 states and probably been to record stores in almost every state, and I'd never seen anything like this. And then there was another one that opened up like that in Dallas. Is it true that everything's bigger in Texas?
Oh, well, not everything, but things we do tend to have big things here. Like, again, it's a big state full of people with big egos and, we have room to spread out, but, I wouldn't say everything's bigger. We do have those 4-pound steaks, though, so
There you go.
right, and those small interchanges. But yeah,
Well,
that's, something you hear. Everything's bigger in Texas.
so what would you recommend? Would your advice be for, people visiting Texas for the first time and, places to see, things to do, experiences to have?
Well, again, Texas is big, so it kinda depends where you land. Texas, I'll put on my CVB cap here for a second, but there's a lot to do no matter where you are, whether you're into the outdoors. Like I said, we have beautiful state parks all over the state, but if you ever get a chance to get out in West Texas, if that's your thing, Big Bend National Park is a beautiful thing, and there's the Big Bend Ranch State Park, and these are, combined, it's just in that part of the state is more than 1,000,000 acres of parkland, and just with stunning canyons and mountains and desert terrain, and it's really it's different than, you know, any part of the United States I've encountered.
Me too,
It's not as majestic as the Rocky Mountains, but it's majestic in its own way.
for sure.
But then our big
Well,
cities have plenty to offer too,
oh
Houston
yeah,
and San Antonio, Dallas, plenty to
oh yeah.
offer.
And San Antonio is such a great city. For a lot of folks who've never visited, the Riverwalk is really something special and very unique and quite frankly unexpected.
It really is. Every time I find myself in San Antonio, and down on the Riverwalk, even especially, I love the Riverwalk. And for people that don't know, it's the San Antonio River that snakes through the middle of town, and the city. I think going back to I think it was a WPA project, I believe, originally, and it was also for flood control. But a series of locks and dams, and they regulate the level of the river through downtown, and there's these beautiful sidewalks, and you're in the middle of this urban setting, but you go down a set of stairs, and there's these sidewalks lining the river, and lots of restaurants and bars and businesses and nice architecture, and it's sometimes it gets a bad rap, but it's really as a kind of touristy thing, but it's really is beautiful. It I love if I find myself in San Antonio and walking the Riverwalk or taking a jog in the morning, and it's very peaceful, and it's just it's really pretty.
Well, wrapping up with Austin, what are your recommendations for the city of Austin?
Well, again, it depends what you're into. You outed yourself as a music lover, and Austin is known as the live music capital of the world, and
Right.
that really holds. But there's so much music in this city, and just the diversity of music. But any night of the week, you can go out and find some amazing music anywhere in town, and whether that's rock or country or jazz, it's like it rivals New York. As on any night of the week, you can go out and find some just
I,
amazing music.
I as a New Yorker, I would say it probably takes that top spot.
Right. Yeah, and it really is amazing because what you can go out on a Tuesday or a Monday, and you can easily
Absolutely right.
find some beautiful music.
Sure can. Well, beautiful music, beautiful state. David, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Mark. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All Across America is produced by me, Marco Vig, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Visit us on Instagram at All Across America. Check out our website, allacrossamerica.com. There's an interactive map with all our episodes, and there's a Contact Us page where you can send your reactions, guest ideas, and suggestions. So get in touch, stay connected. To me, that's what podcasting is all about. Thanks for listening.